Hi, I'm Tim White, and welcome to Chapter 4 of our Friends Heritage Project. In Chapter 4, we're going to be talking about slavery, Indian settlement, and relief work. And it's a chapter packed with a lot of great stories in it.
I'm Philip Cox, and we're going to start this chapter by looking at some of the timelines that led up to the Underground Railroad and the abolitionist movement in the 19th century. That'll start with people like George Fox and George Keith, the Germantown Quakers, John Archdale, Benjamin Lay, people who were significant for their times. Some of them were abolitionists, some weren't, but they still held a position that was unique for their time. In 1743, the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting really makes a decisive change by writing up a query that considers slavery to be a sin. We're going to look at the work of John Woolman in the 1750s and Anthony Benezet in the 1770s and before then, really getting involved in the abolitionist movement as a movement.
Now, we've got a lot of handouts on that, a lot of good information that you can read and follow through that timeline. It's very, very interesting because, of course, the Civil War is such a monumental movement. So we lead up to that with the Underground Railroad. This particular slide that we've prepared obviously shows the North and the South, and then we have an overlay for it. When you click, it builds in this image of the Underground Railroad. And of course, slaves were escaping the South and going to the North. This particular map kind of shows how the different routes north towards freedom. And of course, if a slave could enter Canada, which was an English territory, they were instantly free. So that was the goal, was to try and get north and get to Canada. Now, the Quakers were extremely active in the Underground Railroad. And of course, Levi Coffin was known as the president of the Underground Railroad. Levi Coffin was actually married to Catherine White Coffin, who is a relative of mine. And through his work and the work of many, many other Quakers and many, many other people, he was a great organizer and was able to smuggle over 3,000 slaves to freedom over probably about a 25-year period. And the Quakers, because of their loose organization and kind of their unique way of organizing, were able to be very, very effective in this particular movement. As a matter of fact, in the book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, there's a very, very famous story about a slave with her baby running across barefoot the river to a Quaker who saves her. That's actually a true story of Levi Coffin in that particular book. In 1847, the Dred Scott decision is made. That allows slavers to go into the North and to drag slaves back behind their wagons. This is the first time that the North sees slavery up close and personal. At that same time, about 1851, Uncle Tom's Cabin comes out and is a runaway bestseller, the most famous book sold for many years, except for the Bible, in America. And that brings the story of slavery home to a lot of people. Now, Uncle Tom's Cabin is a literary work that's fantastic because it captures not only what's going on with slaves, but it captures some fantastic images. This particular one slave, of course, one of the main characters in the book, is eventually murdered, basically killed, and as he's dying, he forgives his slave owner. There's a tremendous tragedy, unbelievable story, and those particular images and those particular qualities of that book had a tremendous impact, and it was used quite widely. Now, Quakers were very, very active for many years prior to the Civil War. John Greenleaf Whittier was very active on the political and the philosophical side, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, was friends with many Quakers, including the Coffins, and wrote this powerful book. So there's a lot of things going on in the background prior to the Civil War with the Quakers and the anti-slavery movement. This particular chapter, we have an experience. And this particular experience, I'd like you to organize the class and have a woman read what's called The Farewell. And it's a heart-wrenching poem by John Greenleaf Whittier talking about a woman whose daughters are sold into slavery. And I recommend that. It's a powerful experience, if you will, for people to go through the class. And there's a full write-up on how to implement it in your class that you're teaching. So, you want to take over on John?
Yeah, John Greenleaf Whittier was significant as a political mobilizer, a person who was addressing intellectuals more than anything else. And one of the ways that he was most significant was actually in the election of 1860. He noticed before others did that Pennsylvania in particular was going to become a huge swing state, not only because of the large amount of electoral votes that it had, but because it had a key, unique political situation where it didn't recognize the split in the Democratic Party. That meant that whoever won Pennsylvania had a good chance at winning the 1860 election. Mm-hmm. He moved there 2 years before the election and campaigned for Lincoln and the Republicans and made a huge influence there.
So a second experience that you may opt for instead of the first one, which is a repeat from a previous chapter, is I have a poem called The Quakers Are Out, which talks about John Greenleaf talking about Lincoln's win in the Keystone State, which is Pennsylvania, which led basically to Lincoln winning the election and the end of slavery. And it's a fantastic poem, and this could be your experience for the particular class. Make sure that that people kind of catch the nuances in it, but it's a great poem to use as your experience for this particular thing.
We also wanted to take some time in this chapter to talk about the relief work that Friends did. They became famous, starting with the relief work after World War I, really trying to minister to orphans and other people who'd been made refugees by the bombing throughout Europe. Adolf Hitler was actually one of the people who really benefited from this as a child, and he remembered that later on, which allowed Friends to do some unique work in the years leading up to World War II at trying to rescue people and save people. The American Friends Service Committee was a famous organization that was founded right around World War I as a method for giving people who were conscientious objectors alternate service that they could do instead of serving in the Army. The movement, or the AFSC, has since kind of departed from being a movement that represents all Friends churches, but back then it really was.
Really a dynamic organization.
Yeah.
Friends had a lot to do in World War II, both pre and post. My grandmother, for example, when the internment of the Japanese Americans happened, my grandmother took care of a young newborn Japanese baby. She was heavily criticized by some neighbors for, quote, aiding the enemy. But as a Quaker, she was adamant that that child would not go to the internment camps where the child probably would have passed away. And she kept the baby for almost over a year. Her parents were able to come back and from time to time, and they were, of course, reunited. But Friends were very outspoken that the Japanese internment was a bad idea. They also helped out in a tremendous amount of refugee situations pre and post-war. And Herbert Hoover was a fantastic organizer. As a friend, he understood the dynamic, and you had to have truthful people on both ends of relief work in order to make it effective.
Yeah, all of this work really led to Friends being one of only 3 groups ever to be awarded a Nobel Peace Prize as a group. So, yeah, if you go to a Friends church, you're a partial Nobel Peace Prize recipient.
Now, for our handout, every class has a handout, and this particular handout, we want to come back around to this concept of slavery. Slavery is alive and well today. We had a significant role prior to the Civil War in getting the laws changed, but slavery is still available. Human trafficking is a very, very big problem. So I've prepared a handout for an organization called Not for Sale, and I would recommend that you re-energize your class with the knowledge that slavery still exists today and that human trafficking is still a major problem right here in America. This isn't a problem that is far away. It's in our neighborhoods. And so please call attention to that with this particular handout. There are some bonus slides beyond this, but for the construction of the class, we think that this particular set of slides could be the most useful to you. If you want to read on further in our handout, there are some additional slides. You may want to mix and match those in. But with that, we're going to adjourn chapter 4. Thanks for watching.